This too.
A little leery about being on his committee.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. If I could bring us to order here. Chairman Don Parsons to my immediate left here is a little bit under the weather, but he is marshaling on through and at the Capitol. His voice is a little shaky today due to a scratchy throat, so I'm going to handle this meeting for him as he's requested. We have before us today items on the agenda. HB 208 LC 450192, sponsored by Chairman Tom McCall. I don't think we put a sign-up sheet out, so I'll go to speakers after the representative has made his presentation and the committee has asked their questions. Chairman McCall, wherever you want to be, sir, we'll turn you on.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chairman, and thank you, Don, for getting out in this weather and coming down here. I appreciate it, sir. Appreciate you letting us present this. This is it's real simple. It only affects Georgia's electric cities, and I think it's 50 or 52 of them, and Crisp County. And all it does, if you look on line 9, 14, and 19, it scratches out 10 and adds 20 years to a contract that the MEAG cities will be able, and county, will be able to enter into on contracts that require further time than 10 years. And I don't know how else to explain it much simpler than that, but that's what it does. It'll allow MEAG and Crisp County to be able to do what they need to do in the climate that we are in this kind of position that takes longer than 10 years to do something.
Mr. Chairman, just so I ask, this doesn't change any questions about their other contractual obligations of how much or where they could do or anything they can do. It just says if the contract, in order to make the deal work, needs to be for a longer period of time because perhaps something that they're doing is financed over a long period of time, that they have the ability within their board to enter into that agreement. Doesn't require them to, but they can.
Doesn't require anything. It just gives them the opportunity to.
Questions from the committee? Number 9, Chairman Warehouse. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think it will actually help companies as they continue to go green. The example is Walmart's got an initiative. This will allow them to sign contracts in the future, whereas if this were in place today with a 10-year, they would not be able to sign, but it would allow them in the future.
That's correct. And I didn't want to get into all that kind of stuff, but that's what it does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Number 6. Mayor.
I represent 3 MEAG cities, and I'm all in favor of this, so I'd appreciate your support.
Yes, ma'am. At the appropriate time, we'll come back to you. Number 4. Who is that? Representative Frazier. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
thank
yes,
you,
ma'am.
Mr. Chairman. Sorry. Mr. Chairman, where's the measure number 20 come from?
I don't know if it was arbitrary or that's a cement number or it was raising. It just doubles the time is what it does. And I think it would bring in the parameters of what Chairman Werkheiser was talking about as far as companies like Walmart or somebody wanting to go toward green energy. It would allow the solar panel companies to, I think 20 years is long enough.
I do too.
I think where that may come from, what the chairman said is, in order to put an expenditure together and do a lease back arrangement and so forth, it needs to be that much, or it needs to be for a period of time that long, or it would be more expensive if you had to amortize it over a 10-year period than a 20. So they could do that. They may well do an extension to that later, but they have to have at least 20 in order to amortize it over something, make it to make it make financial sense. Is that
That's a
sort
good
of what we're
answer,
getting
Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. But in some contractual agreements, it's not 20 years. You're just giving them this timeline to be able to finish it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and again, to be clear to the lady's question, this does not mean that the project will take 20 years to build. This means that when you build the project up on the roof, if you put, and I believe we're talking about solar projects here. I see heads
Pretty
in the,
much, yeah.
nodding that the project would be built and be online, and it just takes for it to make sense to pay back. The contract needs to be for a period of 20 years so that they can amortize the capital cost, the CapEx expenditure over that period of time. Some may be larger, more efficient, and maybe be able to be done for a lesser number of years. And again, if they're in place, they could be extended. But 20 years is what was this? In no place does this mean that it takes 20 years to build.
20.
Yeah, it doesn't take 20 years to build.
Right.
Okay. Any further questions for the committee? We have before us HB 208 LC 450192. I think we have something good going on here. Is there any speakers that wish to speak to this? Any speakers? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim Thornton, Mayor of the City of LaGrange, which is one of the MEAG cities, that was referenced by Chairman McCall. And just to follow up very briefly, what we are doing as a city and as a MEAG utility is we're responding to customer demand. We have customers. Walmart was mentioned. In LaGrange, we have 2 Walmart retail stores and 1 distribution center. 15 of the MEAG cities have Walmart facilities. Walmart has initiated a corporate policy that they want to go totally renewable in their energy demand, which basically for us means solar. And so this would actually enable MEAG to do a solar project and, as was referenced, recover those costs by placing the risk off on Walmart or any other corporate customer that wanted to take on the solar commitment. The question was asked about the time frame. The time frame was not completely arbitrary, although it was sort of a rounding. It was a rounded number. We believe through some preliminary estimates that it's probably 15 to 17 years for us to actually recover the cost and the risk, and that obviously we haven't built the project yet, so there's a lot of factors that could change that, but 20 years we feel like is very doable. From my perspective as mayor, what I'm trying to do is make sure that my ratepayers and my citizens aren't taking on risk. And so if Walmart or any other corporate, Facebook, IKEA, any of these other corporations that are looking for solar projects want to come to us and ask us to provide solar, we want to meet their request. Obviously, they're a customer and we want to supply their request, but I don't want my citizens to take on that risk. And so by extending the contract with the corporate customer for up to 20 years, 17 years, whatever the numbers work out to be, then we're able to basically offload that risk onto the corporate customer who is asking for the renewable power rather than my taxpayers being on the hook for it. And so that's why it's something that at the City of LaGrange is obviously very supportive of. We actually have a potential project that would be owned by MEAG, and so it would benefit all of the 49 municipalities that sell electricity, as well as Crisp County. And it would particularly benefit the 15 cities that have Walmart stores that are already in their portfolio in particular. It just happens that the initial project would actually be located in the city because we have identified a location for the project. But ultimately it would be a MEAG project. It would be a benefit to all of the cities. We just don't want our citizens to be the ones taking the risk since this is coming as a corporate request.
Okay, so to be further clear on this would allowing you to go to that number of years would be advantageous to your other ratepayers and would allow the risk to be on the people that want it. Thank you very much.
That's correct. We could do this project now with a 10-year contract, but there would be a risk that at the end of the 10 years, if there was a rate differential, then our other ratepayers would have to take on that risk. By extending the contract, we can push that risk off onto the corporate customer.
Fair enough. Would the gentleman take questions if there are any?
Absolutely.
Any questions? You were concise and clear.
Okay.
You have no questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Anyone else that wishes to speak on the measure? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Acting Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Allie Kelly. I'm Executive Director of a nonprofit foundation called The Ray, and we're going to be presenting some other information to you shortly. But I just wanted the committee to know that this is a bill that The Ray is in favor of because it offers flexibility to electric cities to engage in contracts that will allow them to respond to customer preference in a changing and modern energy market. The one point that hasn't been brought up that I think is worth noting is that your electric cities are in real peril right now as customers like Walmart are moving towards 100% renewable energy goals and mandates that are internal corporate mandates. There are cities across the state of Georgia that host distribution centers and retail stores owned by Walmart that are gonna have to respond to corporate mandates within Walmart to go 100% renewable. Right now, these electric cities don't have the contracting tool to provide the specific type of power that customers like Walmart are seeking. And Walmart has other options. If they can't get the specific power from their electric city, they can build the solar on their roof. And that means that the revenue that they're paying to these electric cities could reduce if they decide that they're gonna get the power by building the solar on their roof. So this is really an attempt to help the electric cities to provide the type of power through their existing customer relationships instead of being in danger, real danger right now of those customers
Ms. Kelly,
finding other avenues.
let's work on the bill. We can make a presentation
Yes, sir.
here in a second. So I mean, I appreciate that. It's just I know people have different places to go, and if we want to get a
Sure.
vote on the bill. So I'm taking it you're in favor of the bill.
The Ray is very
Yes, ma'am.
supportive of the bill.
I'm joking with you, of course. No, you're a great advocate for renewable energy, and we appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
questions for Ms. Kelly? Thank you very much.
Thank
Any
you.
other speakers on the item? House Bill 208 LC 450192. Any speakers? Chairman McCall, I'd ask you for any rebuttal, but I think you got a winner if you want to just.
I don't have any rebuttal.
Yes, sir. If you have a seat, I'm going to go back to Representative Holmes over here and see if we can get you moving.
I think she's
if there's
got
not
a good
objection.
idea.
Does anyone else have questions for Chairman McCall? You okay with this, Mr. Chairman? Anyone else have questions? I have a motion from Representative Holmes. I have a motion and a second. It seems like we have a popular proposition. Any discussion on the motion? Motion is to approve 208 to move forward to rules with a due pass recommendation. That's LC 450192. Any discussion? Further discussion on the item? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion do pass, say aye. Any opposed, no. Motion carries. We'll record that vote as unanimous. Not an objection is recorded as unanimous. Thank you, Chairman McCall.
Let's see, where's Blake? Okay. Go ahead and proceed.
Initiative. I'm Dina Perry. I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Community Affairs for Broadband. The Broadband Deployment Initiative, I'm sure we're all quite familiar with the background. I think what's important on this slide is the legislative deadlines. The deadlines for the program was on May 7th is when the act was passed into law. And on July 1st, the DCA designated GTA to be their partner in the broadband mapping. On January 1st, DCA was to publish its first phase of Map 1, which we did so. The mapping is based on the FCC data. On June 30th, we are to provide an update and a progress report of 2019. July 1st, DCA is to develop to complete the broadband program. So this is an illustration of the governance as we saw the statute. The Executive Steering Committee is made up of both DCA and GTA. The projects outlined in the statute required hand-in-hand work between DCA and GTA. We also have an advisory committee made up of AT&T, ACCG, the Georgia Cable Association, Comcast, Georgia Economic Development Authority, Georgia Municipal Association, Georgia Telecom Association, Georgia EMC, and Windstream. They have been critical partners, and we have met monthly to consult and also provide those to represent working groups as we've worked on the mapping effort and the grant program. As I said, I'm the executive director of the broadband program, and my role is to oversee the initiation of the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative and also work with the consultants JBN. GTA contracted with JBN on behalf of DCA and GTA for project management and oversight so that we could do a timeline schedule so that we meet our deadlines. Other important stakeholders that we have been meeting with are the other agencies that are named in the legislation, the Department of Community Affairs, Georgia Technology Authority, Georgia Department of Transportation, States Properties Commission, Georgia Department of Economic Development, and UGA. We have a monthly meeting with the state agencies, the 5 agencies, to discuss our resources and how we can work collectively in resolving and coming up with a solution to bring broadband to unserved areas of Georgia. Also, it's important to recognize that we also have other stakeholders that are local governments and service providers. What we identified as the key projects in the legislation for us to carry out and implement is the development of a broadband plan, the broadband report, developing a grant program. Under the grant program also was looking at the comprehensive plan, developing a broadband model ordinance, broadband ready community designations, broadband ready community sites, and mapping of phase 1 and then again phase 2. This gives you an idea of the milestones and the progress. These are some dates and schedules as we have met with different stakeholders, including our advisory committee, our state agency partners, as well as creating the opportunities for workshops. We've had workshops around the development of the model ordinances, meeting with the providers to discuss how we approach our mapping effort. We have both a phase 1 and a phase 2 approach to the mapping. So some of the key accomplishments. In August of this year, DCA created the position of Executive Broadband Director, which is my role. And my role, again, is to oversee the implementation of the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative. We established the 5-agency framework in coordination to begin a schedule of meetings with the 5 agencies so that we could meet to identify our resources, that we could work collectively in identifying how we as a group and as each state agency can contribute to solving and coming up with solutions for reaching unserved areas. Again, we established the advisory committee and a meeting cadence on a monthly meeting so that we could collaborate with those advisory committee members. I would like to add that both the agencies, the 5 agencies, and our advisory committee board members have been very participant and cooperative, and it's been a great collaboration as we've gotten to this point. At that point in time, also GTA has contracted with JBN again to oversee the timeline of the implementation of the overall initiative. JBN Consulting. So the mapping effort, what we began to do was to meet. We identified 44 providers that are residential and commercial service providers throughout the state. So we began to talk with them about how they would participate in our mapping effort, to collaborate on how to best approach that. We knew that we needed to develop a master address file, and then we would need to have validation and verification from those providers as to where they might provide service. We completed the FCC analysis and determined that with the mapping of the FCC, while there is more information to be had to identify unserved areas in Georgia, those areas that have been identified by FCC as 100% unserved, we knew that was a place to start, as where we do know where the unserved are at this time for the mapping effort. We also began a piloting of 3 counties for our phase 2. We began that in October. Lumpkin County, Elbert County, and Tift County. We also developed the rules for the designations. They were passed at our board meetings in the fall. We have since developed the process for applying for the designation. This week we went live on our website for those communities who want to apply for the broadband ready designation. You can go to our website and find the information in the application, and we were able to publish the model ordinance that we had developed through our working groups. The broadband ready community site application is under development, and it too will be posted on our website. The model ordinances were part of the requirement of the broadband ready community designation. We formed a working group made up of our advisory committee representation from local government and providers. We had 4 meetings. We worked on each element that was stated in the statute and began developing the model ordinance. We finalized that and developed that, and it's an example of what communities could adopt in order to meet the requirement to be a broadband ready designated community. Our grant program, we are in the process of developing our rules and requirements. We have collaborated with other states. We have looked to Tennessee, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York, Alabama, and a number of other states who have implemented a broadband program and have begun funding a grant program to see what their rules and regs and find out their best practices and lessons. We've also looked at other federal type programs, federal grant programs that are funding broadband to see what rules would make sense in incorporating in our rules and regulations. We've also looked at DCA and DCA's programs and what rules and regs would be adopted and be applicable to this program. So to give you a little information about our mapping effort, basically it's solving for accuracy. If you look at on the left-hand illustration, that's the Fcc method, and that's what we're calling phase 1. That represents 4 census blocks with each dot represent a location. So when FCC does their mapping, they receive information from a Form 477. And if a location in a census block receives service from a provider, then that census block is considered 100% served. So if the illustration represents 4 census blocks, you have a number of locations in that census block. You may have 100, and that will represent residents, and that will represent commercial businesses. With the FCC mapping, if one location is receiving service from a provider, then it's considered 100% served. So, right. So, the definition of unserved with the Georgia statute is if 20% or greater of locations in a census block does not receive a service of 25.3 or greater, then it's considered unserved. So what that means is that we need to identify the number of locations in a census block, not just one, but however many numbers in a census block of locations, then we need to identify those locations, and then we need to determine who receives service at a 25.3 and who does not. And that's the illustration on phase 2 plan. You can see there's a larger number of green location numbers. Let's say there could be 100 locations in a census block. So if 20% or 21% or greater are not currently receiving a 25.3 service, then that census block becomes unserved. This right here is currently the FCC mapping. This is what we have published. This kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to achieve with phase 1 mapping and phase 2. What we do know, as I said before, if an FCC has identified a census block as 100% unserved, then we know that's a place to start looking and where that would be grant eligible. Phase 2 would be what we're trying to achieve with our mapping effort. So the way that we have approached this is that we take a county, I mentioned the pilot counties, we take a county, we collect the addresses for that county, we are getting that information from county data, then we identify who the providers are in that county. We have them verify or validate whether or not they can provide service. And the end results would be the number of locations that are not currently receiving service. As I mentioned, we have piloted 3 counties, Lumpkin, Elbert, and Tift. We did a random selection across the state and the information on the county data that we could get, or what drove those selections. The demographics and the makeup are different so that we could get different samplings. We are wrapping up that pilot in the next 2 weeks. We have 1 county left that we are waiting to have the data to come in to see how the results. We have worked with the providers in each county. Overall, we've identified 7 providers in the 3 counties. We received the initial address data from the county government. Then we provided those address locations to the providers for that county. We had them to verify and validate whether they provided service to those locations. The end results is being able to identify what census blocks are now unserved based on the state definition. Once we have received the data, we have met with the providers to go back over that and to give them an idea of what that data might look like, so that we can do a final analysis of best practices, lessons learned, and what we can do to carry this approach statewide. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted you to be able to come because we need to kind of understand where we're at, with the legislation we passed last year. And want to make sure that the committee members had a chance to ask questions and to learn as much about where we're at. I think basically you're saying everything is, unless I'm misunderstanding you, we're pretty much on track or are on track with what was passed as legislation last year.
We are.
Now, we don't have, as I recall, in that legislation, we did set up for there to be where local governments, for example, could draw money from a fund, but we haven't done anything to put money in a fund. Is that right?
There's no money currently. There's no money to the fund, and the applicants would be the local government and a development authority looking at partnering with and an agreement with a provider, or in the case that a municipal network is there, then they too could apply directly for that.
Okay.
But currently we do not have any funding.
Okay. I think we do have some questions. But here again, I just wanted to kind of, put it in perspective. We have some new people on the committee, and basically, what was in that legislation last year that we passed had passed out of this committee in some way or another. It always been my thought that we needed to have a home. Somebody had to take responsibility and be the big daddy of broadband in the state. And I guess you're not the big daddy, but you're the mama. So, and then we have to have that. We have to have somebody that kind of people can point to and ask questions. And I did want to ask you, the 3 counties that you mentioned, Elbert, Tift, and Lumpkin.
Right.
Tell me how those were. Why did you select those, and why were they selected? Lumpkin just seems to me to be a different animal than maybe the other 2.
Well, they are very different in demographics, and that was one of the reasons that we selected them, because we wanted to see the different makeup and what that might bring to as our results and as a sampling. What we did. So what's critical in being able to do this mapping effort is to collect the address from the counties at whatever level. We're actually looking at different resources where we get that information from. We get it from the local government, whether it be the tax assessor office or 911. We've also have different sources from, like I say, 911, the county assessor's office, electric providers, whomever can give us to build on that master address file, because what we are looking for is all addresses, whether commercial or residential, that could receive services of a broadband connection. So whomever has provided us with the information that we can begin the mapping was really where we started first. And then identifying the providers, which we had, to be able to verify whether or not those addresses did receive service, because we were trying to get information sooner than later so that we would have a well-planned to extrapolate this across the 159 counties.
I wanted to ask you too. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I've just got these things pop up in my mind. But isn't the FCC aren't they doing further mapping to get down better information and get down further into those census blocks than they had. I remember seeing something that somebody out of Minnesota or some place had a thing on LinkedIn some time ago where the FCC was actually trying to hire people to do more of the mapping, getting more of the mapping information. Is that right? Or?
Well, so their approach is verifying whether there's an unserved area or not necessarily at the location level.
Okay.
There is talk nationwide about doing a location level type mapping. Both FCC, we also have talked to providers would like to do it nationwide as well. The approach and how you do this, because it's a lot of data, and it's a heavy lift of getting that much data, especially the addresses on the front side of it, and then of course having that verified and validated by providers.
So I guess, so what y'all are doing then would be to, there is no money in the fund, so there's no money unless we appropriated it could go out for anything. I'm just trying to think of if we have an area that y'all identify as, where the broadband either doesn't exist or barely exists, or it's not really, it's not really to a level that it needs to be. Is there anything that we're doing yet? I mean, I know you're gathering information, you're setting all this up, but is there anything that's happening? I guess there really couldn't be. I mean, it's always been the issue anyway. What do you do? We know we have a problem, but what exactly do we do? Is there anything that, you have an area and you have a provider or two in that area that's in the general area, but as far as incentivizing them, we can't do it with money right now, except if it's some kind of a grant that comes from the FCC or the Department of Agriculture or something like that. We can't do anything to incentivize that. What do you see happening? I guess that's my question. What do you see is happening over the next year, 18 months, something like that?
So the current information that we're collecting, at least being able to identify the locations that are unserved, we think that gives the communities and the local governments a lot of information. Now they know where those unserved areas are, and so if they could work with a provider to somehow partner together to identify and look at their own internal resources of how they might approach that would be one benefit. And we are also looking at how we can support those who are applying for the USDA funds.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you have a local government, some area that it's identified that there's a real issue there with lack of broadband, then that local government would know that maybe they need to do something. They need to streamline their process of letting somebody come in and provide broadband. There's some things that they could do. Okay.
Right. Yeah, the challenge is the return on investment and identifying these locations. They might be able to identify clusters where perhaps now they've identified an area that would attract providers.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to shut up now. We have some questions if you'll take them.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
And I have no idea who had it first here. You do, right? Who? Who? Oh, okay. What number? Representative Dickey, did you have a question? I'm sorry. Representative Dickey. Representative Dickey. Did you have a question before you left? Okay. Thank you. I didn't mean to embarrass you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having Ms. Perry come, because I am just like you. I don't know where we're supposed to start now as it relates to once we pass the legislation. Now what for my area? I wish you had chosen Burke County. We have a whole lot of clusters and spots that don't have broadband. But my question to you is this. Once you get the data in from the pilot counties, how long will this take for us to get this information to our local municipalities so that we can start drawing money down from somewhere? You keep using the word we need to partner with a provider somewhere. We don't have a whole lot of providers in Burke County. So who am I going to partner with if I don't get money down from the government? And how am I going to cover my entire 826 miles I have up in Burke County with broadband, which is desperately needed?
So with the pilot, like I said, is the first 3 counties, and we wanted to look at this and to see lessons learned, and what we can do in working with the providers to expedite this effort as quickly as possible. But as you know, it is a heavy lift, so it will take a year or so. It'll take some time, and the way that we'll continue to approach it is when we get the information in from the counties, which we are working through the regional commissions. We are reaching out directly to the counties for them to provide us with their address information, and then we identify who the potential providers are or the providers for that area to verify those unserved areas.
Mr. Chairman. So, as you get the information will be given to the local municipalities. It's nothing that I need to take back to them, because right now I can't have a conversation about broadband because I don't know enough. And I know that there are several steps and levels that you have to complete. And if it's going to take about a year, will this all go through maybe ACCG, or will it be like some type of information that will be given to the counties as you develop them, so that they would know?
So we will use ACCG and GMA as a way to communicate out the information and where we're at. The mapping will be done in phases, so we won't be a completion at the end of the year, but it'll be done in phases over a course of a year to a year and a half. But we will use GMA, ACCG. DCA has regional reps that works within the different regions that provides information on DCA's programs. That also will be a source. We will use the regional commissions. There's 12 regional commissions that represent different counties throughout the state. We'll use them as a way to communicate out the information. The information will also be published on our website. As we develop out the mapping, the phase 2 will publish that information on the website.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Just a couple comments and then a question, if you don't mind. Is that okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am. If you speak into the mic. I'm sorry, you were speaking. I thought I saw the other mic there.
I was. I just didn't have it up in my face. First of all, what kind of, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of technology, mapping technology, are you using?
So we have contracted with GTA, through GTA with the University of Georgia through ITOS. And their mapping is built off of initiative that they did statewide with the State Broadband Initiative in 2009.
Okay. So I know we're talking about broadband, but I'm thinking about the census information that really you're collecting for us along the way. And are you finding new people out there that maybe we didn't know we had while you're doing your survey? So we want to count more people. We want to make sure we have an accurate count of people in our state totally for our census. So while you're doing your broadband initiative to see who's served and who's not served, are you finding a discrepancy in between the number of people that we have and?
Are you talking about the census block
Yes.
effort? That is a different effort and a different project, and our mapping effort is just in the pilot phase. So to know if we'll find a discrepancy between what the census block reports and what we report, we don't know at this
So
time.
you haven't done a comparison yet. You're just
No.
Okay. So what have you seen so far in the 3 county differences? Anything of note?
We have found it in some counties that there is a significant difference between the FCC mapping and then our mapping effort in the number of unserved areas. We have found that there has been some change, but the change was more in where those unserved areas were by comparison to FCC.
So you could be off like 300% in a huge number of your FCC mapping versus your phase 1 mapping.
I'm not sure if I understand the,
Well, based upon the FCC criteria of just having 1 point in a census block, that has to be, broadband
Served.
recipient,
mhm.
you could be off, based on your numbers, like 300 or 400% in one census block.
Well, there could be a significant difference in the FCC map of of a
And your
census
map.
block and my map.
Yeah.
Correct, because the FCC census block, if one was served, then it's considered unserved. But if you have 100 locations in that census block, you could have 80% of them or greater that's not served.
Thank you. That's a big number.
All right, we do have some more presenters. I appreciate you taking questions. If we could, okay, Representative Dickerson, do you have a question? Okay, what's your number? Okay.
As I was taking notes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the presenter. Why does a company have to partner with a local company to apply for a grant? And I know there are some other states that you don't have to do that. They just directly provide the funds, without partnering with the. I'm just kind of piggybacking off of her question with that. Okay, with that provider.
A project that would meet the requirements and the qualifications defined in the statute would be a project for feasibility and sustainability. And to be able to evaluate that project, you would need to see how that project was developed and designed to reach those unserved areas. If you are a municipality that you have a network and you want to build out your network, then you absolutely could apply to do that.
Okay, because I know like in states like Tennessee and Alabama, you don't have to apply a partner with a company. You can just.
So unlike Tennessee, you can apply, a provider can apply directly to the state of Tennessee for funding, but in the state of Georgia, you cannot. The applicant must be a municipality or local government or a development authority.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. I think it's really good, what we've done and what you're doing, and I know there's still a lot of problems, as Secretary Holmes here is always glad to point out. I mean, we just have, not because of you, It's just a lot of places still, and with that, I will just thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Allie, Ms. Kelly. Ms. Kelly has a presentation on the Ray.
Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Harriet Langford, and I'm the president of the Ray, and I'm also a trustee of the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. I'd like to share a quick story about my father, Ray Anderson. He was born in West Point, Georgia. He got a football scholarship to Tech, and that really was his only ticket to college. And he was a smart man, and he started his career with Procter & Gamble, and then went to Milliken, and then in 1973 he rolled the dice and started his own manufacturing company, which was different than anything that was around, and it was modular carpet tiles. And so Ray grew his business to be $1 billion company around the world. His product was actually in 110 countries and on 4 continents. And in 1994, the West Coast of America really put my father in a spot. They challenged him and said, "What's your company doing for the environment?" And Ray didn't really understand at the time. He said, "Well, I comply by all the rules and laws." And a book landed on his desk. He was asked to give a kickoff speech, but they required him to read this book, and he read it. And it was the book Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. And in that book, my father got to page 6, and he said it was his true spirit of the chess moment, and it was the death of birth. And he realized just what a plunderer his carpet company was for the environment. He had not followed any laws or anything that would advance him to become more sustainable, so he really had to challenge his company. And they all thought he'd lost his mind and gone around the bend. He was just a little early in the time, and now you can look around the world and you see sustainability in all corporations' portfolios. So really, Ray had to tackle emissions and waste, and he had to challenge his company to literally go into landfills and reclaim and reuse his carpet tile. And this is what started the whole closed-loop recycling. And in turn, this is where Ray made the most money ever. So he really proved the business case. You can do well by doing good. And in 2011, we lost our hero. He ended up passing away. And what was interesting about my father was he left the majority of his estate to his only 2 children. And he left no directions or instructions, just go do good work. And I thought the right thing to do was to put my father's name on a particular stretch of highway on I-85. He was born and raised in West Point, Georgia, where you see on exit 2. And on exit 18 was where he opened up one of his first manufacturing carpet tile companies, and then later on opened another one at exit 2. And after that was done and the governor approved it, I kind of had my spear in the chest moment. I said, oh my gosh, I've just put the greatest industrialist of the century's name on a dirty highway. And what's sustainable, much less restorative? So we sure didn't know, but I challenged Allie Kelly to come on board, and I knew her from Georgia Conservancy, and we literally took what Ray Anderson did for Interface and started applying the initiatives to a highway. But something very quickly emerged. If you'll see there, 0 deaths. We are losing way too many people every year on the highway. What are we doing to make our highway sustainable? What are we doing to make it smart? And we're carbon. That's where we are right now, and we don't think a thing about taking and making and wasting. So it was really interesting to apply working with Georgia Tech was really inspirational for us, and we realized that we could take a liability and turn it into a huge asset and really leverage more value. Our particular area has about 250 acres, and we're looking at the right-of-way. We're looking at for energy production, and we know that this is something that could be applicable on any state. We see great value here, and I would like to turn it over to Allie Kelly. We've moved really quick on this project. We've been able to install several technologies that we think are critically important, and we looked around the world for these technologies. And I'll turn it over to Allie.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for allowing us to give a report on the Ray. As Harriet just described, we began this journey in highway and interstate transportation technology back in 2014. After Representative Randy Nix sponsored the House resolution that designated the highway as the Ray Anderson Memorial Highway, and after Governor Deal signed that House resolution into law. Because Harriet and her family have supported our work through their philanthropy, we have actually become one of only 2 living laboratories for transportation technology on a public interstate in the entire country, and we're one of less than 10 in the world. The only other living lab in the United States for transportation technology is in Colorado, run through the Colorado DOT, which is called their RoadX program. We are not the DOT, obviously, but we work really well with Georgia DOT and the Federal Highway Administration. The State Transportation Board passed 2 unanimous resolutions in 2014 that got us started. Commissioner McMurray and the Federal Highway Administration's Georgia Division Office are now writing a charter with the Ray to institutionalize, formalize our work far into the future. Our model is really a public-private partnership that includes philanthropy. So we're an expansion on the P3 into a P4, public-private philanthropic partnership. we didn't invent the P4, but we're building highway infrastructure using the P4, and we're probably the only P4 in the world that's actually building infrastructure when the rest of our country is, Georgia DOT is doing a great job of building infrastructure, but a lot of the other states are having a hard time moving infrastructure projects forward. We at the Ray, through the P4 model, have been building highway infrastructure for the last couple of years because we've been able to bring philanthropy to the table. When I say living laboratory, what I mean is that we take technologies that are proven, that are safe, that meet all the criteria of our state and federal partners, that meet common goals and objectives, and we allow those technologies to perform in a public environment, for better or for worse. We're open to failure, but we've only ever succeeded so far, so we're going to hopefully keep that going. But when technologies are allowed to perform in a public environment, a couple of things happen. Number one, the general driving public starts to see innovation in transportation in their own backyard. And so things like advanced mobility, driverless cars, smart highways, these kinds of things become a little bit more real to the general driving public because we're actually bringing those technologies into a public environment. The other thing that happens is that these technologies have an opportunity to shine nationally and internationally. So we in Georgia at the Ray have actually scaled technologies after allowing them to be demonstrated and perform for the first time in the entire country or in the entire world on our stretch of highway, that 18-mile stretch of highway. So, we have seen first in the U.S. technologies take off and become proliferate in other areas of the country and other areas of the world because they were given the opportunity to perform and succeed in a public environment called the Ray. We had no idea that we were going to be doing this kind of work. Harriet asked a noble and honorable question, which is, can we do better? If we started over with transportation, could we achieve better outcomes for the environment, for the economy, for the communities, and for the drivers? The answer is absolutely yes. The technology's at our fingertips. We just aren't great in the transportation sector at actually leveraging technology because the risk is so high in the transportation sector. Having said all of that, we really wanted to focus our brief comments to the committee on energy, because this is the Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. I just want y'all to know, we do smart highways work. We have a very large V2X, or connected vehicle pilot, coming on board with Georgia DOT this year. We also do a lot of vegetative work on the sides of the highway, but those topics aren't really germane to our discussion in this committee today. So we're just going to talk a little bit about energy and transportation and the opportunities that Harriet mentioned for us to take unproductive and wasted single-use assets and have them multitask, have these assets work a little bit harder for us, produce a little bit more, which helps DOTs and it helps the system itself. One example of this, I actually brought a little section of a solar road that we have on the Ray. We were the first in the United States to install a section of solar panels in the pavement. This is a French solar road product. It's called Wattway. We installed this in December of 2016. Our Georgia DOT gave this a permit, even though they had nothing else to refer to in the world except for France. We were the first pilot outside of France in the whole world. And our DOT figured out how to make it happen, how to give it a permit so that others could copy us. And they also tied the solar road into the DOT grid. So the road surface generates clean energy that makes DOT's operations greener on the Ray. I'll show you a couple of pictures. It's a 50 square meter section of solar road. You don't have to disturb your existing pavement. It actually adheres onto your existing roadway, so you don't have to throw away, discard, or change your existing infrastructure. It simply allows the travel lane to multitask. You can still get from point A to B on the road surface, but it also generates clean energy when a car or truck is not directly shading that area. You can drive any kind of vehicle over it. Harriet and I have seen with our own eyes 18-wheelers fully loaded driving over the 50 square meter section. Tour buses full of people will disembark and take a look at the technology after they've driven over it. Ours was the highest producing pilot. In the first 12 months, we produced about 6 megawatt hours from 50 square meters, which is less than the size of the average driveway. But that's about 6 megawatt hours is about what the average American home consumes in energy in an entire year. So basically, with an area smaller than your driveway, you could power your entire house for a year. The other thing that I'll say about this, the company has gone on to innovate a version 3, and in April we'll take up the entire 50 square meter pilot of the original Wattway and we'll replace it with version 3. So we'll be the first pilot in the United States of the latest version of the Solar Road product. Moving on, but still talking about renewable energy and specifically solar power, we're working with Georgia DOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and Georgia Power to install 2,600 solar panels on the side of the interstate on the stretch of I-85 known as the Ray. The solar panels will be on 4.5 acres of DOT right-of-way, which is all the acreage on either side of the interstate and sometimes in the center median. I don't know if you've ever looked at all the land and scratched your head and thought, I wonder what we could be doing with that land. Well, Georgia will become the 3rd state in the country following Oregon and Massachusetts to pilot the utilization of the roadsides of the interstate for the production of clean, green, renewable energy. As I said, 2,600 solar panels on 4.5 acres at exit 14 of LaGrange. I think we still have the LaGrange mayor here. He's been an important part of making this project a success. This is a 35-year project, so Georgia DOT will stop paying to maintain this land, and Georgia Power will start maintaining it as a part of this solar project. So I'm saying that Georgia DOT benefits on day one by reducing their maintenance burdens with respect to the roadsides. Ours will be 40 feet from the edge of pavement. The only thing that differentiates this from any other solar site is that the utility is having to install crash barriers, so additional crash barriers will be required. But 8-foot fence, the company is installing LED lighting and security cameras, but that's pretty standard for their large-scale solar in other parts of the state. What's special about ours is that the entire site will be converted into pollinator-friendly habitat as an understory for all of the solar panels. And just as a general statement, as we're bringing online hundreds of megawatts of solar on thousands of acres of land in South Georgia primarily, a lot of those new solar farms are adjacent to working farms, where working farms would benefit from wild pollinators, bees, butterflies, birds that pollinate our crops. And so if we could learn from this site, this pilot site on the side of the interstate, where we're going to use the entire ground cover of the 4.5 acre solar site growing native pollinator plants instead of fescue or Bermuda or gravel, just choosing native pollinators provides 4.5 acres of pollinator habitat preserved for 35 years, which is the life of this asset. And we could be repeating that over thousands of acres of solar farms in South Georgia and add value to the farms that are adjacent to those solar power plants. Last but not least, I'll talk a little bit about carbon. Harriet mentioned that the challenge that we have right now is really how do we go zero carbon with transportation. Transportation in the United States is the biggest contributor to carbon. It's also, you know, we decide what cars we drive, and we don't want to be creating mandates of what people drive. We need to figure out how to decarbonize within. Yes, sir, we don't want mandates. Yes, transportation is the largest contributor to carbon. We've made a lot of headway in the power sector and the energy sector, but the transportation sector is so much a part of individual choice and individual decision making, and it's a real challenge in terms of how we get to zero carbon. The very first thing we did on the Ray, this is not going to impress you, but it was our first step, and that was to install one single EV charging station on the interstate. This is really hard to do because of U.S. law. U.S. law prohibits the commercial provision of services to motor vehicle users, which means that we can't proliferate EV charging or truck stop electrification on the nation's interstate system until we change U.S. law. What we did at the Ray to get around that piece of relic U.S. code is to provide EV charging for free. So the foundation provided a DC fast charging station at basically at mile marker 1 on the northbound lanes of Interstate 85 right after you cross the Chattahoochee River coming from Alabama into Georgia. With one single EV charging station, we opened the corridor from Montgomery, a capital city, to Atlanta, a capital city, which previously there was not enough charging infrastructure to enable Nissan Leafs, Kia EV Souls, and really any other EV except for a Tesla. Yes, sir. This is a DC fast charging station, which is really important. It's about 18 minutes to achieve almost a full charge of your average EV. This is the kind of infrastructure we have to have on the interstate system because people don't want to hang out at a rest center for 4 hours. They want to walk the dog, they want to use the restroom, they want to pick up a map, stretch their legs, and get an EV charge. This is a solar-powered EV charging station. Yes, ma'am. For the EV charging station, longer than the line for the bathroom. It is a solar-powered EV charging station. We don't have backup battery storage, so it's not a direct link between the solar panels and the EV charging station, but they do have level 2 chargers, which are great for urban areas that have a direct link with a backup battery system for overnight charging. The last thing I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about is EV charging wirelessly in a lane while in motion. This is an effort that the Ray has become a leader in. What you're looking at is the charging module. So that round, that circular object, that's actually one of the workshops of the Select Center. So Select is a very broad public-private consortium. It includes huge companies like Toyota and Siemens. It also includes academic institutions like Utah State University, which is where their test track is located. It includes DOTs, Colorado DOT, Utah DOT, and it includes nonprofits like the Ray. What is this? So that module creates a magnetic field, and AC energy can be transmitted in a magnetic field. And so the module is just-in-time delivery. It's a smart module, so it is anticipating an electric vehicle as it approaches. It creates a magnetic field and delivers, I think this module delivers 15 kW through a magnetic field without wires while the vehicle is in motion. This is Harriet on the test track. So Harriet and I drove in a 20-seat heavy EV bus going 45 miles per hour or faster and getting 15 kW from the road. In October at Purdue University, the Ray and Select convened a group of about 30 owner-operators, including state DOTs and tollway turnpike authorities and a couple of utilities to talk about how the technology steps out of the laboratory and out of the test track in Utah and steps into a public environment. We believe that the Illinois Tollway Authority will be cutting the ribbon on their EV charging lane in late 2019 or early 2020, and Colorado DOT will follow before 2023. So the idea that you could have lanes that charge electric vehicles while you're driving, that idea is not a 2030 or a 2050 idea. The technology is proven, and really what we're down to is energy harmonics, right? How do we manage the flow of energy to the roadsides for the kind of discharge that we're talking about? And then how do we deal with road maintenance, basically with materials, which is a DOT thing. You know, how do we mill and inlay roads without disturbing these kinds of complicated modules that are embedded within them? I just want to mention we do have the nation's only pilot of perennial wheat on the roadside. Why perennial wheat? Because if you can't generate wind energy or solar energy on the roadsides, then perhaps you could engage farmers in harvesting wheat from the roadsides. This is a new cultivar. It's not a genetically modified plant. It's a cultivar developed by the Land Institute in Salinas, Kansas. The wheat reseeds itself without human intervention every winter, and part of the plant's characteristic as a perennial is that it grows 10-foot root systems. And that actually makes this one of the superheroes of carbon sequestration. Perennial Wheat does a great job of scrubbing carbon out of the air and sending it 9, 10, 11 feet into the earth where it doesn't get disturbed in the topsoil. It's time for us to wrap up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. We're having a great time on the Ray, and we're trying to create something that is a source of pride for the state of Georgia. We're trying to lead the country and the world in the development and deployment of transportation technology that's smart, that's simple, and that makes a difference. We don't make unicorns on the Ray. We take technology that's ready for prime time. We standardize it with a permit or whatever is necessary for it to scale, and then we help it go to other parts of the country and other parts of the world.
Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
the presentation. Really appreciate it. Allie has actually,
not.
Allie has stopped me over the last couple of years and would tell me, you know, things about this. And I'm glad we had the presentation, because everything that I've got from you, then I would go tell somebody else I think was exactly wrong. I didn't get everything you said.
I'll ask for one more point of privilege, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. So we have started signing and creating partnerships with other entities. We have a 3-year partnership with Colorado DOT that all of this is parallel to and adds value to the long-term relationship that we have with Georgia DOT and FHWA. But we have a strategic 3-year partnership with Colorado DOT. We're about to sign a strategic partnership with the Pennsylvania Tollway Authority and Peachtree Corners, which Peachtree Corners has several miles of autonomous vehicle testing and demonstrating. And so you'll soon see Peachtree Corners and the Ray offering opportunities for technologies to deploy in the urban as well as the rural setting.
Thank you, both of you, so much. That's a great presentation. Very important. Thank you. Blake, what, I know we have another presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'll be very brief. I have a high-level overview. Should anyone like any additional information, our staff is available and we'll meet with you. My name is Warren Shepard. I'm with GEMA Homeland Security in the Critical Infrastructure and Key Resource Unit, and I also work with our Firstnet. I'm going to provide a brief overview on Firstnet. You have the package. I know that you have some new members on the committee. So what is Firstnet? It's a wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. The federal government enacted a law in 2012 that saw its creation, allocated $7 billion and 20 megahertz of space available, 10 up and 10 down. What is public safety broadband? It allows public safety, our traditional police, fire, EMS, medical, as well as some extended users, public works, schools, to be able to gain situational awareness by bringing everything they can do in the office out into the field onto a mobile device and having real-time information. And it provides them that situational awareness that they need. In November of 2017, Governor Deal opted into the Firstnet, which gave the Firstnet Authority, and AT&T was ultimately awarded the contract, the responsibility of designing and delivering and building the network for the state of Georgia at no cost to the state of Georgia. This is part of a 5-year process. We are a little bit more 13, 14 months into it, so they have another 4 years to get this done. They're progressing very well. They've met some of their goals, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the Milestones section. What is it going to provide? It's going to provide first responders who subscribe to the service critical information in a highly secure fashion. That's what we're concerned about, is the security. It's going to provide that priority and preemption, and I have a couple of slides that will demonstrate that better than I can explain it to you. It's going to provide enhanced coverage in our rural areas in the state. Firstnet and AT&T, as part of the contract, have to provide coverage to 98.9% of the geographic area and 98.9% of the residents of the state. So they have to have that coverage, that LTE coverage in that area for public safety to use. When in use by public safety, the excess capacity would be available for commercial use. So that would allow the public to get on, and if it was needed, the priority and the preemption would take over. So the public safety priorities for this project is a highly secure network that meets the data demand. As it's continuing to grow, it started at very, very small bits of data. Now we're transmitting video, transmitting audio, receiving video audio, transmitting sensors from the Internet of Things, sensors that are on police officers, that will be on firefighters, so we can look at that. It has to be controlled by the locals. It's not something that's controlled by the federal government. It's not something controlled at the state level. Each of the local entities that subscribe to this service have a local portal that allows them to control it. And it has to operate, it has to provide coverage where it's needed. It has to provide it to those first responders where they need it in all of the areas of the state, not just in our metropolitan areas. So it has to reach out to the rurals. As part of the requirement, they must provide coverage in the rural areas, or there's some substantial penalties that AT&T would be responsible for. Who's responsible for building a network? Firstnet has contracted with AT&T to be responsible to build that. They'll build it. They'll add whatever features are needed. Do public service entities have to subscribe to it? No. It's optional. It's up to them. If it provides a better service, more cost-effective, security, the interoperability, and they want it, it's up to them to subscribe to it. If not, they don't have to. If they're happy with their current provider, they can. There are, as typical, network user fees and device costs. As you have now with any commercial service that you buy, you have to pay for the service and you have to pay for the devices. AT&T is now requiring all their devices that be band 14 compatible, which is the band that the FirstNet network will operate within. This is the diagram. So if you sort of have a routine day going along, you see we're on band 14 or route 14. You have our primary users, police, fire, law enforcement, your extended users, which might be your public works, public health department, and then your regular commercial customers. Driving along, all of a sudden a crisis starts to occur. People get elevated up. They now have priority. They may have preemption. As the crisis continues to develop, we then see people being forced off the highway, so to speak, and we see more public safety entities coming on. This allows them to have the capacity so they're able to communicate. And as the crisis even gets worse, we're able to move vehicles onto their other networks that they have, band 17, band 12, and band 4. So it continues to grow. So it's not just the 20 megahertz of bandwidth that was originally envisioned in the program. It'll expand out to their other commercial networks. So some of the milestones for Georgia. They've exceeded their goals for adoption. They have goals that they have to meet. They have to require a number of customers to help fund the system. If they don't, then there's a penalty in place. They have far exceeded that. They successfully deployed satellite COTS, and those are cells on, going back to a satellite connection, a cell on a light trailer. They're able to drive that out for search and rescue missions, and during the Hurricane Michael, we had them deployed. AT&T invested over $43 million just for the Super Bowl, bringing micro, macro cells, other deployables that they placed in the area, and that equipment's going to remain here, so the coverage in the metro area has greatly increased. They added 30, upgraded or increased 30 DASs, which are distributed antenna systems. In the area, they had 4 satellite trucks that were available. We had nationally, there are 5,000 FirstNet qualified agencies that have come on board. For over 500,000 customers have moved to FirstNet, so it continues to grow. FirstNet is well ahead of their build-out schedule. They estimate that they're at 40% overall with the deployment of band 14 spectrum as of 2018. Band 14 has a greater promulgation rate and building penetration rate. So you get more, it's a low band, high band sometimes won't penetrate through a building. The distance is much shorter. You're going to get a greater rate, so you have to have fewer cell towers in order to accomplish the mission. And that was the quick and down and dirty high level. If anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to entertain them.
Well, thank you for coming. I don't see any questions, but great presentation. We appreciate it very much. Thank you, sir. We do have another presentation. And I think that's Georgia Tech, and I apologize.
Georgia Tech, I'm okay.
Yeah, somebody's going to stay here. Well, you know, I just believe all this is good information that we need to hear, and your presentation as well as the others, and thank you very much for coming. So you may proceed. If you'll identify yourself.
Yeah, happy to be here. So my name's Tim Lewin, and I am a faculty member at Georgia Tech, and also I have Rich Simmons and Mary Hallisey with me, and we all work at the Strategic Energy Institute at Georgia Tech. And so I think the motivation for this invitation was there was an article in the AJC about some big wins for the U.S. Department of Energy at Georgia Tech, and the committee had asked if we could give a briefing on those, and I had suggested, well, those are one part of a much larger energy portfolio. Would you rather that I just talk more generally about the Georgia Tech, what we're doing in energy? So that's based. So the idea of this was just to talk about what we're doing in energy. So it's a real privilege to come after Ray Anderson Foundation. We have a very, very productive partnership with Anderson Foundation. But broadly speaking, so, there's lots of very interesting things going on at Georgia Tech, and one of those is energy R&D. So we are probably one of the largest sort of clean energy R&D organizations in the world. There's about 1,000 people doing energy R&D at Georgia Tech, 300 sort of leads, and so it's a very significant portfolio. And a key part of this is partnering with local companies, spinning out new companies, sort of providing national leadership on compelling national questions and so forth. So I just have a couple logos here on the bottom I thought I would walk through. So first of all, for example, Southern Company and Georgia Power, great partnership. We're working with them on lots of different aspects, both with them jointly, working with them with the federal government, on advanced nuclear power, on smart grid, on clean energy, things like that. I'll brag a little bit about the Siemens logo down there. One of the things that we spend a lot of time doing, I'll just say is parenthetically, is large sort of multinational companies are increasingly down selecting to a small number of universities or R&D organizations to help them with their R&D. So I and my team spend a significant amount of time trying to make sure that Georgia Tech and Georgia entities are on that short list. So a few years ago, Siemens said, we're going to select 9 global universities to be our R&D hub. And I'm proud to say that Georgia Tech is one of 2 of those organizations in the United States. There's only 2. One is Georgia Tech, and the other is in California, California, Berkeley. So General Electric, obviously a great Georgia company. We have very, very deep partnerships with them. And then I have some other logos. And then also the U.S. Department of Energy. So, just to give a couple quick highlights, sort of some of the things that we're very, very well known for is just being a trusted advisor and supplier of both technology and talent. A lot of our corporate relationships are really about sort of developing a pipeline of people that can then go work with companies. Very strong in commercializing research, but then also sort of the intersection with national security, particularly with Georgia Tech Research Institute. I just wanted to, what this committee had specifically asked us to talk about was some of the federal work. So I just put together a quick slide here on some of our federal work, and so we're always working on basically we spend lots of time in D.C. trying to understand programs and making sure that we're a national leader in bringing programs. So for a very exciting recent one was a $25 million program from the U.S. Department of Energy and Advanced Nuclear. So that's a very, very nice program that we're pretty excited about. And I just gave a couple quick examples. We have a very significant activity in cybersecurity, which is a critical enabler for sort of the future clean energy economy. We have about 275 people doing it, not just in energy, but energy is a key part of that. A lot of work going on with nuclear energy. We're very interested in, we partner closely with Oak Ridge National Lab, just north of us, Savannah River National Lab, the Southern Company, and so forth. And then, just a few other things. So we're, Georgia Tech is the hub for what's called the South Big Data Hub. Energy and big data are 2 very, very critical. Big data is a critical enabler, so we spend a lot of time sort of managing, again, that national leadership role around the intersection of big data and energy. Do a lot of work across the state just around connecting communities, demonstrations for autonomous vehicles, the North Avenue Smart Corridor. We have something called Smart Communities Challenge, where we're partnering with different cities and regions on different deployment projects. And then a big priority for us is the innovation centers. The idea is Tech Square, just really making what's bringing large companies to do their very innovative work downtown. And these are a few examples of some of these innovation centers. For example, Southern Company, I mentioned Siemens, Honeywell, Emerson, Panasonic, and so forth. And then lastly, this is just my second to last slide. One of the things we did 2 years ago, we stood up a new, what's called the Energy Policy and Innovation Center. And really the idea of that was to really serve as a crossroads for state leadership and regional leadership on compelling problems around energy, reliable energy, affordable energy, clean energy, and so forth. And very, very strong set of projects serving the state. For example, we worked closely with University of Georgia and Emory on rolling out a model solar ordinance to reduce barriers towards solar deployment, working closely on issues around energy burden. We're closely studying the issue around energy storage in the region and so forth. So I think that's all I had. Just
okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I apologize for you having to wait so long, but you got the most important people here right now. The people that stuck around, right?
All right, thank you.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know they're wanting to go, but I
Yep.
do want. You had mentioned the smart communities as one of the things. I'm just we just passed some 5G legislation through the House. It's going over to the Senate. Probably will pass over there pretty much the same, if not exactly the same. That streamlines the deployment of the 5G technology in a small cell. Isn't that pretty much? I mean, that's a large part of the smart communities, isn't it? That you actually have the 5G at those locations, so that what am I trying to say? The sensors and everything that are on the vehicles, and even with power and everything, that's all there, so all this stuff can actually work.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely a critical enabler, no question about that. For broader activities that you would want to do,
Okay.
no question about it.
Well, the only other thing, I said we have a question, but I did want to say it seems like that. It just seems like, especially with clean energy, of course we have some great power companies in Georgia. We have Georgia Power, we have the EMCs and the MEAGs. I think they do a great job. It seems like sometimes we're not doing enough policy-wise. Maybe we are. Maybe anything else would just be something that would cause more problems. But it just seems like sometimes that we're not doing enough, to me anyways, the chairman of the committee, when it comes to clean energy. But if you have any, not right now, but if you have any suggestions on anything we could be doing, I'm certainly open to hearing it.
Yeah, and likewise, if there's anything we can do to help, we would be happy to do that. That's exactly the reason we stood up this Energy Policy and Innovation Center, was to provide that kind of feedback.
I got a question if you want to take it. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Beth Moore, I live in Peachtree Corners, so when I saw Gwinnett County pop up on your slide, it immediately piqued my interest. I'm also the secretary for the Gwinnett delegation, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the Smart Communities Challenge is, so I can educate everybody else in my county.
Yeah, so what that was it was, and Mary, please correct me if I'm, but basically it was a partnership with Georgia Power, and it was a competition that we rolled out to different communities where they could compete for deployment of different ideas around smart communities and cleaner energy and things like that. And so,
and there were matching required. This was last year. They're going to do a second round. I believe it's
coming up.
This
Yep.
summer or maybe the fall. But there were specific requirements. There were a lot of work sessions. I know they did a lot of work working across the state to bring a lot of the mayors in, a lot of the different cities and communities to see if they wanted to participate. But it did require that they partner with a Georgia Tech researcher, and that the community itself had to match some of the funds that were provided through the program itself.
And one other point on that, 2 of the projects are electric power grid related and 2 are transportation related. And the other way they structured it was they knew there would be 4 awards. 2 would be allowed to be Metro Atlanta but not City of Atlanta. The other 2 were required to be outside of Atlanta. So that's why you have Savannah and Albany, and then the 2 in Atlanta happen to be the transportation projects.
And you said the 2 projects were, one was electric power grid, and what was the other one?
Those are the 2 families. So one is related to Savannah, sea level.
yeah. We'll send you a full briefing.
Yeah.
We'll find that, and we'll send you a full briefing on it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
In fact, and thank you. On the sea level thing, I would like to hear more about that too. I've heard some different stories and different information on it, and I need to get some factual. I think Georgia Tech would be where I could get some factual information. Thank you.
Well, we have some great projects that we work on with the customer management program personnel down in Brunswick, that we partner on projects with them with coastal and marine spatial planning. And this project is also working with them and a lot of the other coastal communities and other coastal groups.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. And with that, I believe we are adjourned.